بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we will be studying, with the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal, Hadith number 17 from the series of Al-Arba een An-Nawawiyyah. And this Hadith was narrated by Abi Ya'la Shaddad bin Aus, may Allah be pleased with him. He said that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Verily, Allah has prescribed ihsan in all things. So if you kill, then kill well. And if you slaughter, then slaughter well. Let each one of you sharpen his blade, and let him spare suffering to the animal he slaughters." And the hadith was reported by Al-Imam Muslim. Ihsan, if you recall, was defined in the hadith of Umar ibn Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, which we mentioned in the very beginning of our series, hadith number 2, when Jibreel, peace be upon him, came to the Prophet ﷺ in the form of a man that no one among the companions knew him. And he asked the Prophet ﷺ about Islam, about Iman, and about Ihsan. And the Prophet ﷺ defined Ihsan by saying it is to worship Allah Azza wa Jal as if you see Him. And if you cannot see Him, then acknowledge that He sees you. And this means that Ihsan, one of the meanings of it is perfection. So you have to perfect what you do in forms of worship. Also, ihsan means to be kind. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ بِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah has ruled, the Almighty, that you should not worship any other but Him, and to be kind to your parents. So the ihsan to the parents includes all kind of kindness, obedience, respect, financial support. All of these fall under the title or the word of ihsan. So the Prophet tells us in the hadith, Allah has mandated ihsan upon everything. So we learn that as Muslims, you should have this ihsan wherever and whenever you are. Whenever you deal with someone, you have to have ihsan. And the hadith goes further to say that you have to have ihsan not to humans only, but even to your animals. Even to the animal that I'm about to slaughter. How could I have ihsan to something that I'm going to slaughter? Well, it's very easy, as we will explain with the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal. So, ihsan was mandated by Allah Azza wa Jal. It can be obligatory, and it can be recommended. It can be obligatory in the case of the parents, for example. No one says that it's optional for me to be kind to my parents or not. It's optional for me to give them a house, to support them financially, to be respectful. No, it is not optional. It is mandatory. And that is why a lot of the Muslims ask, can we give zakat to our parents? And the answer is no, you can't. This would shock some people and say, how is it that I give my zakat, I give my alms to strangers, to poor, to needy, while my own parents, I'm unable to give them the zakat? Well, the answer is very easy. It is not permissible for you to give zakat from your money to your parents, because it's an obligation upon you to support them and to provide for them. And by giving them zakat, you are hitting two birds with one stone. So instead of taking 2.5% of my money and giving it to strangers, I'll give it to my parents. No, you have to give the 2.5 to the poor, and the remaining in your wealth, you have to provide for your mother and your father, your grandfather and your grandmother. All those who are above you, your parents and grandparents, you must provide for them. So ihsan can be mandatory, and it can be optional, recommended. I see a poor person, I can give him money and I may not. This is up to me. This has nothing to do with the mandatory zakat, mandatory charity, 2.5%. This is different. I already have disposed it and gave it to those who need it. But I'm talking about those who are poor. Is it mandatory upon me to give them money? And the answer is no. Ihsan to them is optional. Highly recommended, but it's optional. It's up to you. Now, people vary in the amount of ihsan that you give to. So no one ever tells you to be respectful and obedient to your uncle as you are to your father. So there are categories. There are priorities, even with ihsan. It is not logical that I have a neighbor who's poor and needy, and I go to a foreign country to give them charity while my neighbor who's close to me is in more need of that. I want to become in the level of ihsan. I have to start with those who are closer to me. I have to start with prioritizing my expenditure and my acts. So it depends on the individual who has this ihsan, and it depends on the recipient as well. It depends on the time, the location, the cause and reason, and it varies from person to person. And definitely the best type of ihsan is when you do this ihsan for someone who was wrong, a wrongdoer, a sinful person. You give him ihsan so that you call him back. You pardon those who have wronged you. This is the level or the high level of ihsan that is more rewardable than other types of ihsan. Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay. Allah Azza wa Jal has mandated ihsan upon everything. So ihsan in terms of perfection and in terms of kindness goes in every aspect of life. The way you treat your children, you have to have ihsan. The way you treat your wife, you have to have ihsan. The Prophet tells us, alayhi salatu wasalam, the best among you are those best to their wives and families. So the closer you are to the Prophet on the Day of Judgment, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, this distance is determined by your ihsan to your wife and children. Every single aspect in life, you can find ihsan. Perfection in what you do. We find and see a lot of the Muslims doing 9-to-5 jobs, actually working 20 minutes a day. And the rest is wasted in reading the newspaper and chit-chatting on the phone and browsing the internet. So they're not doing their job. And they claim to be good practicing Muslims. In some of the Muslim countries where they break for the prayer, the prayer is called at 12:30 for Dhuhr prayer. You find employees leaving their offices 11:45, 45 minutes before prayer time, performing wudu, maybe having a quick bite, going to the masjid, reciting the Quran. The prayer finishes at 1:45, and these people go back to their offices at 1:30, offering voluntary prayers. So they spend 2 hours per prayer that is being paid for by their employer. Is this halal? No, it is not. You're entitled to pray your fard prayer. Maybe squeeze 5 minutes before and after for sunnah prayer. But to spend an hour and a half, and actually this is wasted, and being paid for it, you say, oh, I'm praying for Allah Azza wa Jal. I'm a Muslim, don't you want me to pray? Okay, go ahead, pray, but I'll deduct the time that you go for prayer from your salary. What will happen to the people? They'll pray and come back in 5 minutes. Why? Because it's connected to their paycheck, which means that they were not sincere. All what they wanted was to leave work. Now, I'm not painting everyone with the same brush. Not all Muslims are like this. I'm talking about the lousy and lazy Muslims who utilize their religion to their benefit. So if the boss says, my friend, it's been 45 minutes since you left the office for prayer. I say, you're against Islam. You're an enemy of Islam. No, he's not. He's paying you to do your job. You're entitled for the 10, 15 minutes to go to pray and come back, but not to just sit in the masjid, recite the Quran, and maybe half an hour of a nap, and consider this part of the prayer break. Allah has mandated ihsan. You have to perfect your job and what you do. And this is what we lack in the Muslim world, unfortunately. People are not doing what they're supposed to do. They don't put their hearts at work. They're lazy. Not all of them. But we have a problem when we don't have devotion, when we don't have dedication to what you do. That is why the non-Muslims are doing a good job in this world and a lousy job for their hereafter. Because when they die, they go to hell. But in this world, they're perfecting their work, while the Muslims are doing a good job for their hereafter, sort of. So they go to paradise, but in this world, they're doing the lousiest job possible. And that is why we have corruption, we have bribes, and we have a quality that is lousy and worthless. We have a short break. Stay tuned, and inshallah, we'll be right back. Allahu, Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن أم على قلوب أقفالها.
Soothing verses, awakening contents.
Unlock your hearts. Let us start to reflect and interact with the glorious Quran through simple and interactive grammar exercises.
هو هم أنت أنتم أنا نحن.
Explore the secrets of success that exist in the blessed lines of the Holy Quran.
Using what you recite every day and night, learn 250 words that occur 55,000 times, or 70% words of the Quran. Let's understand the Quran.
Let's join Dr. Abdul Aziz Abdul Rahim in Let's Understand the Quran every Saturday at 4 p.m. and repeat telecast at 2:30 a.m. UK on Peace TV.
We are not addicted to dawah. Addiction implies a short-term fix. One doesn't need to get into the zone to talk about Islam. You do dawah because it is a natural result of your commitment to Allah. If you don't talk, people are going to walk. The most effective combination in the propagation of true Islam is found in Dawah ilallah. Join me, Arif Islam, as we go through Dawah ilallah only on Peace TV.
Follow the tips to make the task of dawah result-oriented in Dawah ilallah, next on Peace TV.
Allahu, Allahu, ya Rabbi, ya Allah. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Allah has mandated ihsan, to be kind, to do things perfectly in all aspects of life, even in means and ways that we think that being kind is inapplicable. The Prophet says, if you kill, kill well, and if you slaughter, slaughter well. So even in killing animals and in slaughtering them, you have to have ihsan. How is that possible? Well, scientists say that the way of killing an animal painlessly is to slaughter it. We have different types of killing nowadays. Electrocution, suffocation, stunning, banging the head with a hammer, not humans, I'm talking about animals. All of these means are painful, or they would spoil the meat. And that is why as Muslims, we cannot eat such meat. The only meat that we can eat is the one that has the blood being spilled. And the Prophet says, alayhi salatu wasalam, مَا أَنْهَرَ الدَّمَ وَذُكِرَ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ فَكُلْ. These are the two conditions. If the blood has been spilled, it gushes out, and the name of Allah was mentioned, you can eat. So the Prophet tells us, ﷺ, that being kind to an animal when you kill it or when you slaughter it is mandatory. And scholars and scientists say that when you slaughter an animal, the senses are gone and it does not feel the pain. Though it trembles and shakes, but this is not pain. It is the natural reaction where the heart is pumping the blood out of the body. And that is why the purest meat is the meat that has been slaughtered properly in the Islamic way, because all the blood that carries the bacteria and the filth and etc. is drained out by slaughtering it. Killing the animal and then chopping its head off does not make the blood come out, because the blood remains. And that is why in a lot of the countries, non-Muslim countries, they don't slaughter. They kill first and slaughter. Why? Because the blood remains in the meat, in the veins. And this means that instead of selling 100 kg cow after slaughtering it, if you kill it, then slaughter it, the weight would be 110 or 115 because of the blood that did not come out. Islam tells us that this is the best way of killing. Actually, this is the only way of slaughtering, as the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. And we go even further, not only physically, but also mentally. People usually think that animals have no feelings. Well, in Islam, we believe that animals have feelings. The Prophet is telling us that when you sharpen your knife, you should not do this while the animal is looking, because the animal knows that this knife is going to be used in slaughtering it. And this hurts the feelings of the animal. Subhanallah. To that extent, Islam cares about animals? The answer is yes. And I ask you a question. If this is the attitude of Islam towards animals and their feelings, how do you think you as a Muslim should feel about the other human beings who are not animals, who are human beings like you, but they don't share your same faith? Shouldn't you be more concerned of how they feel? The answer is yes. You are. We are concerned how they feel within the boundaries of the Quran and the Sunnah. So we treat them and we're kind to them and we deal with them in the same fashion that the Quran and Sunnah tells us to do. Not humiliating ourselves to them, not leaving our pride and dignity for them. A Muslim has dignity, but this does not mean he has to be harsh, rude, or impolite. So the Prophet tells us, alayhi salatu wasalam, to use ihsan even when you kill or when you slaughter your sacrifice or your animal. He tells us, alayhi salatu wasalam, that you should bring quick relief and stop any suffering to the animal, which means that it is also forbidden for a man to slaughter an animal while other animals are watching. And I've seen this in slaughterhouses. People are ignorant. They're not practicing Quran and Sunnah. They're not practicing Islam. They're Muslim by their identity, but they're not practicing Muslims. I've seen people bringing 7 or 10 sheep and they start slaughtering them one by one in front of each other. This is prohibited in Islam. You have to care for the feeling of these animals. You're slaughtering them is not for fun. You're slaughtering them to consume them, to eat them, which is something that you know the food chain is there. So you have to do this to survive. But this does not give you the right not to become a muhsin or to use ihsan. You must, as a Muslim, be kind to the animals when you slaughter them. And as Muslims, we can only eat slaughtered meat. And the slaughtering, it has to be done in the Islamic way of cutting the throat and the 2 veins that run around it. You don't have to chop the whole head, just slaughtering the throat and the veins that are around it. This would make the animal relieved of its suffering, it would not feel any pain, and it would make the meat pure. You have to mention the name of Allah, as mentioned in the 2 conditions. So if a person forgets one of these conditions, then the sacrifice or the animal is considered to be dead meat. We cannot consume it. Meaning that if there's a sheep and I go to that sheep from behind with a hammer, and I take the hammer and I bang it on the head as strong as I can, and the sheep is dead, can I eat it? The answer is no. This is dead meat. I cannot eat it. No Muslim can touch it. Why? Because it was not slaughtered in the Islamic way. So if I bring a very sharp knife and I put the animal to the ground and I slaughter it, and after it dies I say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. I forgot to say it in the beginning. This is a dead meat. I cannot eat it. Why? Because the name of Allah was not mentioned on it. Sheikh, but I forgot. Well, next time, after losing so much money, you will not forget. And this is the most authentic opinion among scholars. If you forget one of the two conditions, you cannot eat, the slaughtering. And the Prophet is telling us, ﷺ, that as a Muslim, you should check your equipment. So if I'm using a knife, I have to check it and I have to sharpen it. Why? It's sharp enough. No, sharpen it more. Why should I do this? Because the Prophet is telling you, he's ordering you, he's commanding you to relieve this animal from its suffering. If you bring a dull knife and you say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and you start doing this and it's not cutting properly and you keep on doing it, the animal is being tormented and tortured by what you're doing. This is not acceptable in Islam. You have to make it as sharp as possible. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and that is it. You slaughter it. But to keep on doing it with a dull knife, this is not permissible and it is prohibited. And using the knives as well is not essential. You can use anything that has a sharp edge. So if you have a stone that has a sharp edge and can cut, then this is permissible. The Prophet ﷺ told us that we can also eat meat that was not slaughtered, but it was hunted. So if you hunt a game, then this is permissible, providing that you shoot it, you throw an arrow at it, you kill it with a spear, something that sheds blood. But throwing a stone that kills it without shedding the blood, this is a dead meat you cannot eat. The Prophet told us that we can use any sharp edge with the exception of slaughtering with fingernails or with bones. So if I have a sharp bone of a dead animal, I cannot use it as a knife. Why? Prophet said, ﷺ, because bones cannot be used because these are used as food for our brothers of the jinn. We don't see jinn. But the Prophet told us that any bone of an animal that was slaughtered and the name of Allah was mentioned, any bone we see, that the jinn would have this bone filled with meat. We only see the bone, but for the jinn, it is full of meat. So we cannot use this to slaughter with. And the nails is the way that the Abyssinians used to slaughter. They had very strong nails. And no matter how strong it is, it cannot slaughter like a knife. So using the nails in slaughtering would mean that you will torment and torture the animal before it dies. And also it means that you will imitate the disbelievers in this fashion. Therefore, let us try from now on to use this concept of ihsan in everything we do. Let us perfect our jobs. Let us perfect our construction, the infrastructure, the things we do. Let us perfect how we deal and treat our parents, our wives, our children, our loved ones. Let us have kindness in all aspects of life, and by this we would inshallah reach the highest levels of Iman, Islam and Ihsan. This brings us to the conclusion of today's program. Until we meet next time, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.